After uncovering significant damage to my Volvo 242's built T5 engine in the last video, I tracked down what many consider to be the holy grail of Volvo engines. Today, we'll completely tear that engine down, inspect its condition, and start planning out the path forward based on what we find. It may not be the quick and easy answer that I was looking for of just taking a nearly stock engine and dropping that in the car. Let's dig in and see what we find. Volvo introduced the 5-cylinder engine in the early 90s. It was both compact and lightweight and represented a massive step forward in technical refinement compared to the redblock engines that preceded it. It's most renowned for two things. First, its service in the iconic BTCC 850 wagon, although that was a highly modified unit that is pretty different than anything that hit the street. And second, it paired a distinctive exhaust with factory turbocharging, making it an attractive recipe for enthusiasts looking to modify. It came in many different configurations over the years as Volvo evolved and refined the engine design. Distributor ignition was advanced into a coil on plug system. Turbos grew from TDO4 15Gs to a 16T, an 18, and 19T, and ultimately K24. Static cam timing became variable for one and then both cams. Valves were lightened and optimized to flow better. Rods were lengthened from 139.5 to 143 and 147 millimeters to lower piston speed, making a more efficient rotating assembly. All of the high-pressure turbo engines that Volvo produced in the 90s had 81mm cylinder bores. In 2004, for the S60R, Volvo introduced a 2.5-liter turbo engine by lengthening the stroke and enlarging the cylinder bore from 81mm to 83mm. This engine was the most advanced so far, with 300 horsepower from the factory, higher lift camshafts, and variable valve timing for both the intake and exhaust cams. However, tuners quickly discovered that the larger bore, which reduced the thickness of the cylinder walls, was the Achilles heel for this engine. Cracked blocks became common on modified engines with increased output. At the same time Volvo was producing the S60R, they also offered an S60 T5. Unlike the other S60 trims, the 2005 to 2008 T5 received a different engine and borrowed all of those advancements from the R engine except for one. This engine was bored to 81mm, leaving thicker cylinder walls versus the weaker 83mm bore from the R. This was the B5244T5 engine, the same engine that is sitting here today. All of that's great, but this is still a used engine from a salvage yard with an unknown history. So we need to tear it down to determine whether this one will live up to the legend. So this is it. This engine was pulled from an 05 Volvo S60 T5. I got it from a junkyard in Texas that had it sitting on the pallet ready to go. It is allegedly in very good condition and has 136,000 miles on it. So my hope is that I can just clean this up and do as little as possible to this engine and put it in the car. I can see right away there's not really any rust on it. So like the bolts and other hardware may be dirty, but it's not rusty. So that should all clean up really nicely on this. So I'm actually pretty excited to take some degreaser and maybe the pressure washer to this and see how clean we can get this engine. It's really interesting taking a look at one of these engines that is completely stock, because I've been working on my 242 with its pretty heavily modified engine for quite a while now. So just seeing exactly how Volvo did everything as opposed to all the little things that I've changed to make it fit in the rear-wheel drive configuration, just kind of fun. Because these engines are allegedly quite capable, I think my plan here is going to be to just take this, get it cleaned up, pull off the parts that I'm not going to use, and replace some seals, and then drop it in the car. I'm trying to get away from having a built engine. I'd much rather have an engine that is put together by the manufacturer with quality control that I can't match. If I can use a factory engine and keep my power goals somewhat modest, probably pretty close to what I had in the car before with about 360 horsepower to the wheels, then that would be great, even if I have to turn it down a little bit. So one of the issues that I knew was there before I bought the engine is that there is a little damage to one of the mounting points for the bell housing. So this spot right here has a chip off of it. I have to clean it up a little bit and take a look and see, but I'm hoping that this is really just cosmetic. So far it looks like it. The threads don't appear to be compromised in any way. It's just part of the mounting surface. This power steering pulley is broken. So this is a plastic pulley on this pump. This pulley's not reusable, which is kind of a bummer, but that's okay because I wasn't going to use this pump anyway. This accessory bracket is totally different than what is on my engine for the earlier style accessories. This is, I believe, the same style fuel rail as the S60R. You can see there's a test port for fuel pressure, and this is also a fuel pressure sensor. I'm not going to use this fuel rail, but that'll be another thing that's kind of neat to have as a backup part. Looks like the oil fill cap must have broken on this, and it's separated. The seal on the cap looks terrible. It's totally split. Forgot that these later engines have a little baffle in here, so I actually can't even see straight to the cams. It does look a little dirty in there. On the bottom here, we've got the turbo and exhaust manifold. This looks pretty decent. No red flags just yet, but really we got to dig in some more to truly find everything. Might as well grab a socket for the crank and start by simply just turning it over, making sure everything moves smoothly. That's a little worrisome. It's not wanting to move. Okay, got a little movement in there. I'm not going to move it any more than that because I don't know how long this has been sitting. So I'm going to do the same test to this that I did to the engine that's in the car in the last video. I'm going to do a leak down test. I know this engine's been sitting for a little while. I don't know how long it's been sitting, but it is certainly possible that there are some things kind of stuck in there. It could be that rings are kind of stuck and need to be freed up. Hopefully not. I haven't dealt with a junkyard engine like this. All the engines that I've used have been gone through much more thoroughly and taken apart a lot more. So this is kind of a new thing for me. These covers look pretty scuffed up. I probably won't be reusing these. I think one of my favorite things about doing stuff like this is I get to see how Volvo did everything. And in this case, I get to reuse all of the factory hardware, which I know sounds like a pretty lame thing. Like anyone who just buys a car and has the engine in it, it has that. But a lot of the time when you're doing an engine swap and you don't have all the original parts, you don't get to do that. And then you're trying to figure out what's the best thing to put in there. And either you're spending a ton of money on buying all of those parts new, or you end up using some aftermarket hardware and it's never quite as good, even if you get really high quality stuff. Wow, it was very stuck. Well, let's just pull all these spark plugs out to start. Okay, this is a surprise. So I just pulled the coil out of cylinder 3 and it was put in the wrong way. It looks like it was jammed in next to the spark plug as opposed to the boot being around it. So that cylinder was not firing whenever this car was last run. Okay. Well, we got something to look out for. All right, so the plugs look decent. They're all matching. They're all good quality plugs. I'm just gonna spray some lube in here. All right, it's getting stuck. I don't know why. I don't want to do too much else before I can see what's going on and make sure that there isn't something actually wrong with this that's causing this to not rotate. We'll see. I'm a little nervous. When I first tried to turn the engine over, it was kind of stuck. There was one kind of rough spot in there. And after I put in some WD-40 and let that sit overnight, now it was able to get past that spot and it's turning smoothly. So that's good. The engine's not totally seized up. It is rotating fine. I do want to take a closer look just to make sure that there's not any like excessive rust in the bores or anything like that that might be something that causes an issue with this engine running as is, and it doesn't need to be taken apart more. But that's a good start at least. All right, looks like we've got 22% leakage. So cylinder 1 is identical to the results that I got on cylinders 1 through 4 on the other engine in the car. Okay, cylinder 2 at 100 PSI test pressure, it's basically 31% leak down. So this decreases the leakage percentage as you increase the pressure. So that's a little concerning, but this engine has also been sitting for quite a while, it seems. So I might see if I can put something in there to try to free up the rings a little bit. Maybe I'll let it soak overnight. All right, cylinder 3 looks pretty much the same as cylinder 2, 34% leak down. It was like 42%, and I could feel a lot of that coming from the exhaust. So it's coming out, must have been escaping past the exhaust valves. But then when I covered up the turbo, I could feel that it was also coming out to a lesser degree from the intake side. So far, these numbers are not making me very happy. So on all of these except for cylinder 1, which had 22% leakage, cylinders 2, 3, 4, and 5 all have somewhere between 30 and 40% leakage, but that percentage of leakage decreases as you increase the pressure on the tester. So this is kind of making me wonder if that's due to this engine sitting for a while and maybe the rings are gunked up or something. But still, I did hear a lot of air escaping out through the turbo, which would suggest the exhaust valves. So I'm not quite sure. It's not as simple of an answer as, okay, these all look super great, let's throw this in and just go for it. I'm not seeing signs of a dead cylinder or anything. You know, most of these are somewhat similar, and it seems to me that it's probably more likely lower numbers because of it having been sitting for a long time. So that said, I think I'm gonna move on to the next step of getting this thing cleaned up. After I did that first leak down test that showed some questionable results from cylinders 2 through 5, I decided to take some Seafoam and put that into each of the cylinders on top of the pistons with the hope that that will free up those rings and allow them to move a little bit better, and maybe that'll improve my leak down result. I looked up online to see what Seafoam's recommendation is, and they said that they do recommend using Seafoam for this purpose, and they said you can put that in there and leave that in for up to 3 days, and they just recommended turning the engine over at least once a day so that you get the rings moving a little bit, and that'll help free things up. I put that in yesterday, let it sit overnight. I've moved the pistons a couple times. I've cranked it over a few times just to move things around. I also went ahead and cleaned up the engine. I just couldn't stand looking at the dirty engine sitting in the garage anymore. So I took that outside, soaked it with some super clean degreaser, and then let that sit in the sun, sprayed it again a couple times, and then rinsed it off using my power washer. I did that 2 or 3 times, and it's looking pretty good actually. Now what I'm gonna do is just remove all of the other accessories that I'm not gonna use for my application. So exhaust manifold, intake manifold, some other brackets down here. The nice thing I'll say is that this plating is all still really pretty nice and shiny. This is much better than it would be if it was off a car that was around here in Wisconsin. As I've been looking around this engine for a little while, I've started noticing more and more signs that someone did some pretty shoddy work on this. The first thing I noticed is that there is a bolt missing for the idler. There were a bunch of different hose clamps replaced on the back that were really crappy part store quality. I just pulled off this oil line on the turbo, and I can see there's a ton of RTV on here, so that wasn't quite sealed correctly. The wiring to the boost control solenoid was also frayed, and that had been spliced in at some point, and just a crappy repair on that. And then if I look down here underneath the turbo, there's a small coolant line running to the turbo, and that hose is entirely kinked. It's kind of like twisted 180 to the point that I would be shocked if any coolant was even flowing through there. Beyond that, I've just seen various bolts that are missing or the wrong hardware has been put back in. And there are some kind of warning signs here and there. So I'm definitely going to be cautious as I look at this engine and decide what way to go with it. This was not a kind of grandma-driven dealer serviced engine, most likely. This is something that someone just learning to work on cars and didn't really have a lot of good advice for how to do that well. So we'll be careful. Here's another example of some junk on here. These bolts have to be very specific lengths because they're going into aluminum. So you can't have them be too short. And you can see this is the original bolt that was supposed to be in there. And this is one that they put in and cut and modified to work, cut a lot shorter. And it doesn't have enough threads. It looks like crap. They did a poor job on it. Just some not so nice things like this. Hopefully it doesn't matter too much in the end because I'll be replacing this stuff, but definitely a warning sign. I can see on this one too, they loaded this up with RTV, constricting that opening, which is really bad. That needs to be free. They apparently didn't have a good stud, so they used a bolt with a nut as a spacer to make it fit. All right, that should be free. K24 and an S60R exhaust manifold. All right, that's everything from this side. Now we can take a look at the intake side. This is that banjo bolt check valve for the PCV system that I pulled off my engine in the car in the last video. This is the one that is known for failing, so I'll be curious to see if this is a revised part or not. I would imagine by this point it is. Yeah, this has the revised part as well, where it has a roll pin in there. All right, now we've got the intake manifold off. Quite a few spots where it didn't get clean on the bottom. That's all right, this will just be an extra. And here is our PCV system. This is a little more complex than what I'm running on my car because they use coolant to heat this. I would assume for emissions. It's the later style thermostat, which is different than what I'm using. I'm using, I believe it's the early style 850 or S71. It's interesting though that on this style they use just 2 bolts to hold this thermostat housing to the head. instead of 3 on the earlier ones. And also it looks like this is a metal gasket, which is kind of cool. And last, we have the oil pressure sensor. I left this sitting for a few days with Seafoam on the rings to hopefully loosen that up. And I've turned over the engine a few times and I can tell it's turning over a lot more smoothly. So now I want to check leak down again and see if I have a better test result or if it's still kind of a bum leak down result on this. And that's really going to inform my decision on what next steps would be with this engine. If this is something that I can use pretty much as is, or if I decide that I'm either going to just kind of push this off onto the side of the garage for future use, or maybe pull the head and look into it a little bit deeper. We'll do a quick leak down check on all 5 cylinders, and then after that, I can flip the engine over and look inside the pan and potentially even inspect the rod bearings. So we're right at about 22 PSI. So hopefully this has made a little bit of a difference. I don't know if this was apparent, but as soon as I started putting pressure into cylinder 2, fluid started coming out of this coolant port in the block. And when I felt over the thermostat housing, that also had air pressure. So that tells me that there's likely some failure in cylinder 2. Either there's a crack in the head or in the block potentially to one of the liners, or something else is going on here with the head gasket, but that is a bad sign. I'm gonna check that again. Okay, well, I'm just gonna continue with this now across the other cylinders. This makes it seem pretty clear to me that this engine is not healthy enough to just use as is, which is super annoying because that is why I sought this engine out. Exhaust valves and intake valves leaking quite a bit. 40%, yeah, this is bad enough that it wouldn't be runnable as is. Okay, cylinder 5 is a little better, 25%. If they were all like that, I might be more inclined to put this engine as is in the car and just run some cleaner through it and hopefully get it to seal a little better, because that's not terrible, but 2, 3, and 4 were all worrisome, especially cylinder 2 with it pushing pressure out of the coolant port. That seems to be a pretty strong indicator that there's some significant damage, at least to the point that the head needs to come off. So leak down test number 2 was not a success. Best case scenario, there's some sort of head gasket issue, I think. Even though this has an MLS gasket, which really shouldn't have issues like this. But yeah, I don't know. So it's possible there's an issue with the head. It's possible that the block is cracked. I don't really know what I'm dealing with until I dig into it more. But the next thing that I can do that's easiest is flip the engine over, pull the pan off, and take a look in the bottom end, see if I see any signs of anything concerning with the rotating assembly, with the crank and the rods. We'll dig in and see what we can find. So first we have to pull this oil cooler off. Okay. And we can pull off all of these many bolts. This pan has all sorts of crap in it. Sludge and crumbled bits of I don't know what. Here, if I can grab some. That is all over in here. Well, I'm gonna try to take one of these rod caps off. So that bearing didn't seem too terrible. Well, I don't see anything in there that's too concerning other than the sludge, but all this coked oil in here, it's just crumbly nonsense. It's like Oreo dust. Well, I think at this point, the only thing to do is really pull the head, and then I can get a better look at the bores and the block, as well as the valves, and maybe that'll tell a little bit more of the story of this engine. So far, this is super disappointing. It's definitely not the engine that I thought I was buying. This was described as a grade A part with 136,000 miles, so it was supposed to be a pretty decent condition engine. This is certainly worse than that. More shoddy work on this. Like all of the other seals I've seen so far, there's tons of RTV. And then on the exhaust cam seal here, this is the most crooked seal installation I've ever seen on an engine. It's really bad. Actually, it looks like they might have had the timing off a tooth. I think the exhaust cam may have been advanced by one tooth. You can see here, this idler is missing a bolt. I contacted the company that I bought this engine from, and I asked them about warrantying this engine because obviously it's not what I was sold. This is in much worse condition. Thankfully, they said that taking the engine apart to inspect and test it does not void that refund. I still can warranty the engine if I do that. So given that I'm not gonna get a full refund out of all the money that I put into this because of the shipping costs, I'm gonna take this apart and see what condition this is actually in, if it can be rebuilt. If I could just get all of my money back out of this and kind of undo having ever bought this, I would. But because that's not gonna happen, and it looks like no matter what, I'm out at least 700 bucks, I wanna see what this looks like. And if this head and block, or one of the two, are good, then we'll see. I might change my mind about sending it back just because I'm losing money one way or another. It might make sense just to keep part of this and then sell some of the other components that I'm not going to use that are all fine, like the oil pan and other things. So that's what I'm doing. That's why I'm digging into this, and we can go from there. All right, now that all of the pressure is off of this cam cover, I can take these back out. These tools are kind of cool. They just hold pressure on the cam cover to hold it in place, compressing the valve springs so that you aren't putting load on each of these individual little bolts while you're tightening them. Nothing too surprising in here. Some light scoring, but it really doesn't seem too bad. Here's a good example of some sludge. There's a whole lot of this. So now I can actually pull this head off. Now that we have the valve cover, or rather the cam cover, and the cams out. Yeah, the surface of this looks weird. The sealing surface on this is really, it's like almost brown. Huh. So, interestingly, this is not an MLS gasket. This is an older style gasket, which is the same that I have on the engine in the car. But I was pretty sure that they were using MLS gaskets on these engines at this point. That makes me think that this was changed. So some work has been done on this engine. For some reason, all of the head bolts on the intake side of the engine were all very, very tight, but every single one of the head bolts on the exhaust side was not all that tight. I don't know if that means that they just forgot to torque head bolts in place after replacing this head gasket, or what really happened here. Yeah, it looks like someone was in here. It kind of looks like someone tried scuffing up this surface. So I bet this head gasket was replaced before. I don't feel a ridge on the cylinder walls, on the bores, so, you know, that's something. I'm gonna clean this out a little bit to try to get a little bit better view of what's going on in here. As I'm thinking about it here, I think I also should probably pull out these pistons, especially now that I'm at this point. It's really not very difficult to do. So really not much carbon on these pistons. It's also possible that I cleaned most of that off when I put the Seafoam in here. And I don't see any marks on the pistons either from valves or anything, so that's good. And the bores look relatively normal to me. I don't see any issues so far. Cylinder 2 was the one where we saw the really bad leak down, heard air pressure coming out of the cooling system. There's a spot in cylinder 2 that maybe I'm paranoid, but kind of looks like there's potential. Maybe that's a crack. It's a little rust deeper in there. First impression is this looks pretty normal for a cylinder head. I would consider potentially sending this out to get pressure tested. In my mind right now, based on what I know about these engines and my confidence in my own ability to diagnose this just visually looking at it, it's kind of a toss-up as far as whether this engine is good or not. The block is what I'm concerned about most. Given the leak down test result that I saw with cylinder 2 losing compression through the cooling system, my concern is that that may be happening as a result of a crack in the cylinder 2 bore liner. I pulled the rods and pistons out of the block, and for the most part, things are looking pretty good. I'm not seeing any major issues. There's some light scuffing on the piston skirts. One of the cylinder's bearings did not look very good, but the crank itself looks great, so it doesn't look like there was a bearing that spun or anything like that. That's a good sign. It looks like the rotating assembly in here is pretty good. As I thought might be the case, a couple pistons have rings that are stuck, so I'm gonna have to free those up, but that may explain some of the leak down results that I saw. However, all in all, now that I've gotten it this far apart, I think this is probably okay. My best bet at this point is that the head gasket that was put on here, which is the incorrect early style head gasket, along with inconsistent torque on the head bolts, is what caused that leak down result of pressure leaking into the cooling system. So my hope is that that will be totally fine. Either way, what I'm gonna end up doing most likely is taking this cylinder head and the block and sending them to a machine shop to get pressure tested and checked for cracks. I want to do whatever I can to make sure that those are good. So that seems to be the best next step to take there. Let me know what you think. Anyway, thanks for watching. I know this is a little bit different, but I wanted to kind of keep the pace up on this project and share with you where I'm at with this as things evolve.